Hi, this is Dan Smith of DPS Legal Counsel, and welcome to today's episode of Legal Scrubs. Today's episode is going to focus on buy-sell agreements, what they are and why you need one. It's one of the most important agreements that any medical practice can have if you have more than one owner of the practice, more than one physician who are owners of the practice. And if you don't have a buy-sell agreement and you have multiple owners, two or more physician owners of your practice, you need to make sure that you get a buy-sell agreement in place pronto, because it is a key document that if you don't have it, bad things can happen. So let's talk about what is a buy-sell agreement and why you need one, and some of the key provisions that you need to think about for your buy-sell agreement. So first, what is a buy-sell agreement? A buy-sell agreement is essentially an agreement that provides for a requirement and a right for a physician's interest in the practice to be sold to the other owner or owners of the practice upon the occurrence of some life event. For example, the normal or the key life events, triggering events that give rise to a sale of a physician's interest to the other owners and their purchase of that physician's interest are the death of a physician owner, that physician owner's permanent or long-term disability, a divorce involving one of the physicians in which the physician practice might become, or his interest or her interest in the physician practice might become a marital asset, and the other doctors in the practice don't want to have that spouse of their former partner involved in their practice. So that's three: death, disability, divorce. Another is if a physician wants to retire or leave the practice. And finally, if there's some event that occurs that makes the continuing practice by that physician impossible, such as losing his or her medical license, committing some criminal offense that would make it either impossible or undesirable for that physician to continue with the practice. Maybe some other event that doesn't rise to the level of a criminal offense, but in the interest of the practice is one in which that physician should leave the practice and have his or her interest sold to the other doctors, such as some major lawsuit that involves sexual harassment, all kinds of things. So you have to think through those issues. But those are the five primary triggering events in a buy-sell agreement: death, permanent or long-term disability, a marital dissolution or divorce for one of the physician owners, a retirement or leaving of the practice by one of the physicians, and finally some disqualifying event such as losing license, committing a crime, or doing something else that makes it really undesirable for that physician to continue with the practice. So if you don't have so that's what a buy-sell agreement is. If one of those triggering events happens, then the physician who had that triggering event, who died, who became permanently disabled, whatever, that physician's interest is sold to the other physician owners. And there is some mechanism in the agreement for determining what the purchase price is and how the purchase price is going to be paid. That's essentially it in a nutshell. Now, what happens if you don't have a buy-sell agreement? Why do you really need one? Well, you can just think about it. If you have a physician owner in a multiple physician practice, and one of the physician owners dies, what happens to that physician owner's interest. Now, the physician owner's estate, perhaps that physician owner's spouse is going to want to get some value for the physician owner's interest in the practice. But you can't have a non-physician own an interest in a physician practice. So there's got to be a sale, but there's no requirement to sell it. There's no obligation to sell it. There's no, and you don't have a purchase price. So you have a big mess. Or the same thing could happen if one of the physicians becomes disabled or goes through a divorce or wants to leave or has some kind of disqualifying event. So you really need to have this in place to prevent a horror story when one of these events happens and you don't have a mechanism in place for selling that physician's interest and having the other owners buy it. You can just foresee problems piled on top of problems, perhaps lawsuits, who knows. It's not the kind of thing that's going to be good for your practice. It's going to be, at the least, extremely disruptive. And so you really need to have a buy-sell agreement. So you see what a buy-sell agreement is. You see why you need one. What needs to be in a buy-sell agreement? Well, first of all, you need to have a listing of what the triggering events are that put it into place, such as death, disability, and the other things I just mentioned. You need to have what assets are going to be sold, whether it's just tangible property, tables and chairs and things of that sort, whether it's going to be some share of the accounts receivable, whether there's some value put on the goodwill of the practice. These are discussions that the physicians need to have on the front end before they need to have the buy-sell agreement take place. You need to have some mechanism for funding the buy-sell agreement, because if the practice is valuable and the interest of a particular physician is valuable, you want to have some pot of money somewhere that's going to be sufficient to buy that physician's practice. And so typically you have life insurance in place if in the event that the triggering event is the death of one of the owners. You might have disability insurance in place if the triggering event is disability. With the other triggering events, you might have to provide for payment over time because there may not be a mechanism for funding those triggering events. But you need to think through those issues. Then you need to have some mechanism for what is the payment schedule. Now with a triggering event that is the death of one of the owners that's funded by life insurance, you may have an immediate sale and purchase of that member's interest. The same with maybe a permanent or long-term disability if it's funded with disability insurance. But with the other triggering events like a departure or a divorce or a loss of medical license, you might have to have some payment over time, but you need to think through those issues. So, in a nutshell, to recap, every medical practice that has more than one owner absolutely, positively needs to have a buy-sell agreement. If you don't have one, get one immediately. Begin work immediately on getting one. And you need to think through all these issues. Talk it over with your legal advisor, your business or healthcare lawyer who handles your affairs, and get that buy-sell agreement put in place as soon as humanly possible. Because if you don't, you're just asking for trouble when one of these big life events happens, and it becomes a major challenge or disruption for your medical practice. Okay, I hope that helps. If you have any questions, please feel free to call. And until next time, we'll see you on Legal Scrubs.